Hi, I'm Colleen from the Demonstration Theaters team at Carnegie Science Center here on our body stage. Welcome to our Watch series, where we film fun educational activities for parents, students, and teachers. Today we're going to be exploring a little bit of biochemistry. Biochemistry, as the name suggests, is where biology and chemistry meet. Biochemistry is the study of chemical processes within living systems. Some ways that we apply biochemistry are pharmaceuticals, food science, and agriculture. Some biochemists have some important firsts in the world of science history, such as Gerty Cori. She was the first woman to receive a Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine. Along with her husband, she studied the metabolism of glucose, which became known as the Cori cycle. Another is Marie Maynard Daly. She was the first African-American woman to receive a PhD in chemistry in the U.S. During her career, she studied cholesterols, proteins, and sugars, but also dedicated her time to encouraging minorities in completing medical programs and other doctorate programs. A lesson that we can learn from biochemists is that if we're going to understand how these processes work inside our body, like metabolism and digestion, we need to understand the molecular structure of the nutrients we eat. One of those nutrients that you might be familiar with is gluten. Gluten is actually a combination of two different proteins, glutenin and gliadin. They are both found in wheat flour, and when they're mixed with water, they come together to form gluten. To learn more about gluten, we're going to do a demonstration with 3 different types of flour: cake flour, all-purpose flour, and bread flour. You can do this demonstration at home with whatever flour you have on hand. The first step is to measure 1 cup of flour into a mixing bowl. You're then going to add water a little bit at a time. You probably won't need more than ½ cup of water, but you want to make sure that the dough doesn't get too wet, so it's good to mix it just a little at a time. You can do this part in a mixer, but I prefer just to use my hands so I can keep an eye on how wet the dough is. Once the dough has come together, the next step is to turn it out onto a clean, hard surface and knead it. Now, kneading is the step where the glutenin and the gliadin really come together to form the gluten, so it's a very important step in the process. To reduce the dough down to its gluten, we're going to actually rinse away the starch. So we're going to put it in the sink with a mesh strainer and run cold water over it. You're going to keep running the water over it and squeezing it out until the water is no longer cloudy. That cloudiness is the starch, and we want to have it nice and clean. Now, whenever you're doing this, you can do it in a regular kitchen strainer, but for a dough like a cake flour, you might want to use cheesecloth because the strands are going to be a little smaller and a little harder to keep together. We're going to let our dough rest for about 10 minutes, but in the meantime, I'll show you ones that we've already prepared. So right here is the dough ball that we've made with the cake flour. The gluten is what allows it to stretch. Right here is our dough made with the all-purpose flour. You can see it's a little bit tougher. And then our dough ball made with the bread flour. Now, right off the bat, they don't look that different, but where the difference really comes in is when we reduce them down to just the gluten. Once they're rinsed, we can let the dough sit out to dry a little bit just to get some of the excess moisture out. But now we can definitely see more of a difference between these 3 types of flour. Over here, we have the cake flour. You can see it's a lot lumpier, not as stretchy as the others. The middle one is the all-purpose. And right here is the bread flour. So these 2 look pretty similar, but the biggest difference is seeing how that one has not formed the nice long gluten strands like the other 2 have. Now, the purpose of gluten in baking is to trap air bubbles that happen when it's rising or while it's baking. So we can actually see how it traps the air by trying to inflate these dough balls. We're going to use a bike pump, and we're going to inflate each of these balls of dough. We'll start with the cake flour. So you just have to stretch it over the end of your bike pump. And let's see what happens when we try to put the air in. We can see that it inflated a little bit, but broke pretty easily. We have almost like a breathing here. That's because cakes have a tender, more delicate structure, and they don't need to trap as much air as other baked products do. Next, we'll inflate the all-purpose flour. Again, just stretch it over. Make sure you're holding it onto the bike pump securely. And we can see that one held a lot more air before it ultimately broke. So that would mean that we'd be able to have larger air pockets in the baked good. Last, we have our bread flour. So let's see how this does on the bike pump. So you can see this one holds a lot more air because that gluten is elastic, and the bread flour has a lot of those long, strong strands of gluten to be able to hold those air bubbles in. To get a better look at how the gluten works within a baked good, we can actually bake those dough balls we made. Put them on a cooking tray and stick them in your oven at 400 degrees for about 15 minutes. Once the tray cools, you can cut them open and see how the gluten's formed those air pockets inside. Looking at the three rolls, we can obviously see a difference between the three types of flour, but if we take a closer look inside, that's where we really see the gluten in action. So we can see with the cake flour, it doesn't have those long elastic strands, so we have smaller air pockets, and that is why our cakes are so tender and delicate. With the all-purpose flour, we can see that there are a little bit bigger air pockets inside. So again, we have longer gluten strands. It was able to stretch, so we have those air pockets. And with the bread flour, this one inflated the most. It had those really nice elastic gluten strands, so we can see very large air pockets inside of it. Now, when biochemists break things down to the molecular level like this, it helps us get an understanding of how these nutrients work within our body, how we can treat different diseases related to food, and how we can create alternatives when people are not able to have these ingredients. Thank you for joining us today while we investigated some biochemistry. For more things to watch, more things to read, and more things to do, go to www.carnegiesciencecenter.org. Thank you for joining us.